What the hell happens next? Venezuela apparently now is a de facto protectorate of the United States. The US is intent on running Venezuela with a gun stuck to the head of the acting president. There's no better person to speak to about what happens in Venezuela, but what about Colombia? What about Mexico? What about Cuba? I mean, he's got a list and he's working his way through. Miguel Tinker Salas, who's a brilliant Venezuelan historian and professor at Pomona College in Claremont, and also a fellow at the Quincy Institute. Previously spoke to you before this all kicked off in spectacular fashion. Great to speak to you. How you doing?
How you doing?
Interesting times, as the Chinese proverb put it. What's just your take on what the hell has happened in terms of, when you woke up, you're a Venezuelan historian, you woke up and you saw that Caracas had been bombed, dozens of people killed, and the president and his wife kidnapped. Let's just say it as it is.
I think I was woken up by the media. I got a phone call at 10:30 from a local Spanish language station telling me there's bombings in Caracas, and I thought, well, there's bombings in Caracas. There was bombings in La Guajira. I didn't connect it automatically to an intervention, and I went back to sleep. And then around 2:30, I started getting more phone calls. No, there's an intervention. I was expecting something. The U.S. had deployed 15 ships, aircraft carriers off the coast of Venezuela. I knew they had to use them or lose them. I knew that invariably something had to happen, and I had imagined something like this. I never imagined with such grand scale. Bombings in Miranda, bombings in Aragua, bombings in La Guaira, and then bombings at the Fort Tuna where Maduro slept, which was a military base in Caracas. So I was initially shocked, but then part of me understood that as a historian, that something like this was going to happen. The reality is what happens the next day. They have no plan. They want to govern Venezuela, but there's no troops on the ground. So they have to negotiate with the existing power structure. In this case, Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president. And especially you have to negotiate with her because he threw the opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, under the bus. He basically said she had no support and she will not govern Venezuela, which was a surprise to her and her followers because they had been expecting to ride into Caracas on the backs of U.S. troops. And that is not going to happen. So it is a spectacle of empire. We have the action. We have Trump talking about it as a TV show, a video game, with the fact that there was 80 people that died and 32 Cubans that died in the process. In some ways, I think that the issue is what happens the next day. He has to negotiate with Delcy Rodriguez, who is now the titular head of Venezuela. She has already the support of the military. She has the support of Diosdado Cabello, the security chief, and she has the political apparatus.
I mean, what do you just make of Maria Corina Machado being thrown under the bus? She won the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, not classically peaceful, agitating for US violent intervention, but then Henry Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize. But I mean, she was thrown under the bus despite being slavishly pro-Trump, and instead it looks like the aim is to make an accommodation, as you say, with Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, the acting president of Venezuela now, who he claims has said, we will do whatever you want. What do you make of all that?
I think that he still resents the fact that Corina Machado took the Nobel Peace Prize. I think that personally, given his ego, he still can't imagine. I think, has proposed that she should have said no and he should be nominated instead. And I don't doubt that, given his large ego, that he still resents that, and that's a part of the fact that he does not want to see Maria Corina Machado play a role here. But the fact that he can't deploy 300,000 troops to the Venezuelan country is the fact that he has to negotiate with Delcy Rodriguez, and will have to find an accommodation. I think there's also pushback from the U.S. military because the U.S. military does not want to deploy 100,000 troops in Venezuela when they have potential conflicts in Iran, potential conflicts bombing Nigeria at the same time. So we shouldn't overestimate the power of U.S. empire. It does have limitations.
I mean, just on that, because I'm going to talk about the threat of what happens next. But a lot of people might look at this and superficially think, well, this is an empire which is high in its own supplies, high in its own strength. it can do what it wants. But the recent national security strategy published in November, uh, issued by the Trump administration, makes it clear that they are retreating from global hegemony, which they say in the strategy at great length are abandoning, in favor of domination of the Western Hemisphere. Basically, the world carved out by great powers with their own sphere of influence, and their sphere of influence is the traditional backyard, Latin America. What do you make of this? Is this not actually a sign of strength, but more of a case of a retreating power which is retrenching its regional power?
Well, I think it is retrenching while at the same time attacking. We shouldn't forget he bombed Nigeria and continues to threaten Iran with another war. So that there is the bluster. There is the bluster, which is again what I've been talking about. But yes, there is the national security document stated what was already a policy, which is that the U.S. declares the Latin America, the Western Hemisphere, to be its domain. That it returns to the Monroe Doctrine, or what he calls today the Donroe Doctrine, because he has to name everything after himself. So it calls it the Donroe Doctrine, and it gives the image of Teddy Roosevelt walking around the Caribbean with a big stick in his hand, trying to impose Venezuela first, put Cuba into the crosshairs, attack Mexico at the same time, and then Colombia. But that's you could bite off more than you can chew, also. And I think that those are the conditions that he's laying out. We should go back before that, when the head of South Command, the military command, actually did a tour of Latin America and came back saying these countries are beautifully, abundantly rich in resources. We should really consider this to be an important area of defense, because they have rare minerals, they have oil, they have gas, they have lithium, they have all the things we need. So we should retrench back to Latin America, and we should establish our hegemony and dominance and begin to exclude China. The document actually says we do not want foreign powers acquiring the resources of the region. They belong to us. So there is a proprietary claim already imposed on Latin America's natural resources, which is what the left has been saying all along. The U.S. is saying it very clearly, that these resources belong to the U.S. Trump more or less said it when he said that Venezuela stole our oil. How that oil got under Venezuelan soil, we don't know, but it's reminiscent of what Trump said about Iraq.
I mean, that's what's different, isn't it? Well, there's lots of things that are different, but I mean, in terms of one of the striking differences between Trump and his predecessors is he's not trying to dress up narrow, selfish US strategic interest in the garbs of democracy and human rights and freedom. He's repeatedly made clear this is about oil and it's about hegemony. It's about the idea that rival powers, not least descendant China, they're not gonna we're not going to allow them to be in our backyard.
That's right. I mean, in fact, the weapons of mass destruction have become drugs, and that's the narrative he wants to use to convince the American population. Because there's two facets here. One is, how does he sell this back at home? In terms of his MAGA base and his supporters, with midterm elections coming up, he's managed to move the conversation away from Epstein, away from affordability, towards this intervention. But long term, it's going to come back to this. So he sells it back at home on the question of drugs. He's trying to protect Americans from drugs. He never really grapples with the fact of why there is addiction in the U.S. And this is really a public health issue as opposed to a military issue, because we've had a war on drugs for 55 years, and still we're fighting a war on drugs. This is going to be the longest war the U.S. is involved in, beyond Afghanistan and Iraq. Yet the weapons of mass destruction are drugs. But yes, he is bold about what he wants. He wants control, he wants power, and he wants resource allocation.
I mean, just before I ask about that bigger picture in terms of what happens next, I mean, across the continent. I mean, Venezuela's regime does seem to have its back completely against a wall. It's encircled by the American military with its sophisticated technology, which has showed they could just kidnap the president and his wife. So, quite remarkable show of force there. And he said that if they don't do, in particularly Delcy Rodriguez, as requested by the US, then she will suffer a worse fate than Maduro, which basically means we're going to kill you individually. I mean, surely that just means this is a US protectorate. Venezuela hasn't been invaded by hundreds of thousands of American troops. They've just found another way to take it over.
Well, this is reminiscent of Cuba, 1898, when the U.S. intervenes against Spain and then imposes the Platt Amendment into the Cuban Constitution, and then Cuba becomes the Platt Republic, essentially a neo-colony of the U.S., where the U.S. tells Cuba what to do, where the political class then is dependent upon the U.S. for its legitimacy and support and military might, because the U.S. intervened in Cuba 6 more times during the Platt Amendment, the Platt Republic. But that also became the spark for the Cuban Revolution, because the sense of nationalism was critical. But Delcy Rodriguez finds herself in a much more precarious position, because she has to deal with the various factions within the PSUV that I did discuss previously, but she also has to deal with the various
Just so people know, sorry, that's the ruling party in
that's the
Venezuela.
ruling party, the Socialist Party of Venezuela, the PSUV. She has to deal with the various political factions, the military, the the security apparatus, the social movements in Venezuela, and then the right-wing opposition, which is divided between the Corina Machado supporters and the other bodies, and then the left opposition, which is also very critical of Maduro for having betrayed the revolution, for having imposed these neoliberal policies, for having tried to create free trade zones. So she has a very challenging road ahead of her in striking this balance and in improving the lives of average Venezuelans. So she doesn't have to worry just about Trump. She also has to worry about Venezuelans.
In terms of what comes next, he's openly threatened the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petros. He was a democratically elected leader. This isn't the same. We could talk about what's happened in Venezuela and the various disasters there. Nobody doubts that the Colombian president is democratically elected. Plus the president of Mexico, who she is one of the most popular elected, if not actually, according to the most popular democratically elected politician on the face of the earth, who won a resounding victory in the last presidential election not that long ago in Mexico, as well as threatening Nicaragua, Cuba. Does he mean it, do you think? I mean, this is the point. This isn't bluster, surely. I mean, do you think we are going to see a strike against Colombia, which is one threat he's making, he keeps repeating?
I think that we'll see the bluster, we'll see the threat, we'll see the spectacle, but I have my doubts that the U.S. military wants to engage. And this is why I said the pressure is both in terms of the politics of the region, but also the politics of within the U.S. military. Does the U.S. military want to be used as the attack dog in every occasion for these attacks, in which it subjected itself to potential involvement in a long-term conflict in the region? It's the old, and does the U.S. now want to say it's going to govern Colombia as well? It's going to govern Mexico as well? It's going to govern Cuba as well, the way it says it wants to govern Venezuela. So again, I think the challenge is not to overestimate. The challenge is there. The bluster is there. The ability to implement, I think, is a much broader and deeper issue that we have to grapple with. And in this context, I think there are limits to U.S. empire.
I mean, Gustavo Petro is the first left-wing president in the history of Colombia. At the left, I mean, you were just saying before we press record, isn't doing so well there. We did see different contexts, different political forces in play, but we did see in Canada, when the US obviously talked about annexing Canada. Wouldn't dismiss that, by the way. And I mean, it seems ridiculous, but here we are. But because of that flipped the election. The Liberals looked like they were going to lose very badly, and that helped rouse Canadian nationalism and stop the Conservatives from winning. So, I mean, do you think? I mean, we talk about how hollow, this is not actually an invincible empire, and this you can actually see resistance against what the US is trying to do. It could change the political dynamics.
Well, I think that while he is attacking Colombia and Mexico, we need to go back to where he started. He started with Panama and Greenland. He started with Panama, and the canal is ours. We built it. No, actually, it was built on the backs of Afro-Caribbean people who died by the thousands in building this canal. So yes, let's go back to basics. He wants the Panama Canal. He thinks the U.S. should control the Panama Canal as both a strategic military issue, but also an economic issue. And he says that for the protection of the U.S., he wants Greenland. So I think that beyond all this bluster, we might wind up seeing a further talk later on about Greenland and Panama. So in that context, I would be more concerned from the position of Greenland and Panama than I would from Colombia and Mexico.
Well, Greenland is definitely getting annexed. I would put a lot of money on it. Just in terms of the amount of effort they're putting in and actually what they're doing in terms of actively interfering in.
Special ambassador to Greenland.
Exactly. I mean, he's ratcheted it up too much now. It will look like a retreat. And there's 2 million square kilometers of European territory. I mean,
Oh,
in terms
where
of
are the Europeans? The good question is, where are the Europeans in this? They have been silent, either because they're afraid of the tariffs or because they're afraid that Trump will pull out of Ukraine. But France and England have been extremely quiet on this matter, as have the other European countries. And this is something that is surprising in the context of uh, global politics and in the context of Russia and China. The silence on the part of Europe is deafening.
yeah, we've seen really pathetic statements here in Britain from the government. That point about China, I mean, two ways good trade between China and Latin America is 259 times larger in 2023 than it was in 1990. China's the continent's second largest trading partner overall across Latin America, behind only the United States. It wasn't. It wasn't even the top 15 back in 1990. That's partly what's bugging them, isn't it? They think to
It is.
themselves,
No doubt
yeah,
about it, because the agricultural production in South America, it does not correspond well with the U.S. markets because the U.S. produces the same thing. So the U.S. will not buy the wheat from Argentina. They won't buy soybeans from Brazil because again, their own producers are making those same kinds of products. So the reality is that China is a voracious market. They want those agricultural products and they want the mineral products and they want the energy products as well. And they're offering better terms of trade. So in that, and they're building ports. I mean, the deep water port that was built by China in Peru is going to become the hub of South America, which is exactly what the Chinese expect. And cheap Chinese imports are dominating the production capacity in most of Latin America. So in that sense, I think, as we said earlier, the hegemony issue here, trying to extricate China out of the equation, is part of this larger process.
I mean, so far from God, so close to the US, as the Mexican dictator Porfirio Diaz was supposed to have said. But I mean, is it easy to just, I mean, this is something you've kind of emphasized, to be fair, just trying to tease that out a little bit more, is don't overestimate the United States of America. The US came out of the Cold War, obviously looked militarily and economically invincible, and then got battered in disastrous military routes. Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, all strategic calamities which showed the emperor have no clothes.
Korea, Vietnam. Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, do you think actually is this a sign actually the morbid symptoms of an empire in decline and trouble?
an empire that's hollowed out, an empire that whose production capacity is really limited. Most of it occurs offshore. It doesn't occur within the domain of the U.S. itself. Where increasingly we have a casino society, a casino where the speculation is highly driving the markets. Everything right now is AI driving the markets. Some say that's going to lead to another collapse, the same way the .com and the real estate, et cetera, et cetera. So there are signs out there that need to be listened to, understood. And then if you expand militarily at the same time, we know that those are inflationary pressures because there's nothing productive about it. Intervention in terms of, except for military machinery, of course, and long term, that's also inflationary. So in this context, I think that there are concerns for the U.S. economy.
Just finally, I'm just in terms of where this could lead. I mean, Brazil is obviously the leading Latin American nation and is formed a power bloc, BRICS. That's for China and Russia and India and various other countries as a kind of counterweight, I guess, to a declining Western power. What do you think that will help consolidate Brazilian leadership? Do you think this will kind of firm up rival alternative counterweights to the US as it
It, w-
lashes out?
it, will, it will depend on national politics because Lula needs to buttress up his own political base with a potential election and the pressure on him to deliver as well in Brazil. So he's subject to the same vicissitudes on the international market as an export economy, and those are part of the challenges he's going to face.
Fascinating stuff. It's going to be a long few weeks slash year. But I guess we've adjusted to that over the last few years generally. Really fascinating stuff. Everyone should do share the video, press like, subscribe, leave your comments. Love to hear your thoughts as ever. But Miguel, honestly, big honor to speak to you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Take care. Have a good day.
You as well.